I was standing in my own living room, wearing my black morning dress, when I heard my daughter-in-law measuring my windows for her new drapes. My husband had not even been in the ground for a full day, and she was already planning to lock me in a nursing home and steal the house I built. She thought I was just a tired old widow who would surrender quietly, but she had no idea about the secret envelope my husband left behind. And she definitely did not know that the woman she was trying to break was about to completely ruin her life. My name is Valerie. I am 62 years old and a retired public school administrator. For 40 beautiful years, I was married to the love of my life, James. Together, we built a beautiful, quiet life in the suburbs of Atlanta. We started with absolutely nothing but faith and hard work, saving every single penny to ensure our only son, Andre, could graduate from law school debt-free. I poured my soul into my family. I am a proud, resilient Black woman, and I always believed that if you sacrificed for your children, they would be your rock in your golden years. I never imagined that the boy I raised, the son I sacrificed my own comforts for, would stand by and let his wife treat me like garbage in my darkest hour. The air in my home was still heavy with the scent of funeral lilies. We had just laid James to rest that very morning. My house was full of guests, eating the food I had spent 2 days preparing, offering their hollow condolences. My feet ached, and my heart was shattered into a million pieces. I walked down the hallway, seeking a brief moment of quiet in my den. That was when I heard the unmistakable sound of a metal tape measure snapping back into place. I stopped dead in my tracks. I peeked around the corner into my formal living room. There was Jasmine, my son Andre's wife, wearing a fitted black designer dress, paid for by the credit card I had secretly helped them pay off. She was standing by my custom bay windows with a tape measure in one hand and her cell phone pressed to her ear. I held my breath as she laughed softly into the phone. Her words hit me harder than the reality of my husband passing. I heard her say clearly to her friend on the line that she needed to order the silk drapes in ivory. She then chuckled and said, "We will have her in a facility by next month. This space is perfect for entertaining." My blood ran completely cold. I leaned against the hallway wall, feeling the mahogany wood I had polished for 20 years supporting my shaking body. My husband was barely in his grave, and this entitled woman was already measuring my sanctuary, planning to toss me into an institution so she could throw dinner parties. I looked across the room and saw Andre, the son I had given my life to, standing just a few feet away from her. He heard every single word. He just took a sip of his bourbon and looked away. The profound grief I was feeling instantly vanished. In its place, a righteous burning anger took over my spirit. They thought I was finished. They thought I was weak. But they were about to learn a very hard lesson. James and I did not have it easy. When we first got married 40 years ago, we lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment that smelled like damp wood and bleach. We worked opposite shifts just to keep the lights on. James was a commercial truck driver, traveling across the country for weeks at a time, and I spent my days as a public school administrator, pouring my heart into other people's children while praying I was doing right by my own. Every extra dollar we earned went into our savings. We did not take fancy vacations. We did not buy designer clothes. We built our life brick by brick until we could finally afford our beautiful custom-built home in the Atlanta suburbs. We paid off our mortgage 10 years early because we wanted true freedom and peace of mind. When Andre decided he wanted to go to law school, James and I did not hesitate for a single second. We took the money we had saved for our retirement travels and paid for his tuition in full. I wore the same winter coat for 8 long years. I drove a reliable, used sedan until the wheels practically fell off. I sacrificed my own comforts, my own desires, just so my son could walk across that stage and receive his degree without a single dime of student loan debt weighing him down. We wanted him to start his life with a clear, unburdened path. We wanted him to have the opportunities we were denied. I gave up my hobbies, my weekend rest, and my peace of mind to ensure he had the best tutors and the best suits for his interviews. I thought I was raising a man who would respect the foundation his parents laid for him. I thought he understood the blood, sweat, and tears it took for a black family to build generational wealth from absolutely nothing. But gratitude is a fleeting thing when it goes up against greed. I should have seen the warning signs when Andre married Jasmine. She was a woman who cared more about how her life looked on the outside than what it actually was on the inside. Jasmine was completely obsessed with status. She drove a brand new luxury vehicle that I knew for a fact they could barely afford, and she always carried designer bags that cost more than my first car. But what truly broke my heart were the constant sly remarks she made about me and my home. Every time she walked through my front door, she had something negative to say. She would run her manicured fingers over my solid oak dining table and call it outdated and heavy. She would look at my kitchen, the very kitchen where I cooked hundreds of Sunday dinners for her and my son, and sigh heavily, saying it needed a modern overhaul to be acceptable for guests. It was not just the house she attacked. It was my mind and my dignity. If I misplaced my reading glasses for a few minutes, Jasmine would quickly shake her head and say I was getting dangerously forgetful. If I forgot to buy a specific brand of sparkling water she liked from the grocery store, she would look at Andre with fake pity and whisper that my memory was really slipping these days. She was laying the groundwork, treating me like a senile burden in my own house, trying to make me doubt my own sanity. And Andre, my smart, successful lawyer of a son, just stood there in silence. He never defended me. He never told his wife to respect his mother. He was completely blinded by her ambition and her demands, willingly ignoring the disrespect happening right in front of his face. Every time I looked at him, waiting for him to step in and put a stop to her cruel comments, he would just clear his throat and change the subject. It felt like a knife twisting in my back. As if Jasmine's cruelty was not enough, she soon found an ally in the most unexpected person. Brenda was my late husband's sister-in-law, a white woman who had married James's older brother many years ago. After her own husband passed away, James and I always made sure to include her in our family holidays so she would not feel alone. But Brenda had always carried a quiet, unspoken sense of superiority whenever she was around me. In the days immediately following James's death, Brenda came over under the guise of offering grief support. She brought store-bought casseroles and sat on my sofa, holding my hand in a grip that felt entirely too tight. But her words were laced with poison. She would look at me with exaggerated sympathy, tilting her head and telling me how exhausted and frail I looked. She would murmur that I looked so weak, patting my arm, saying that living in this huge house all by myself was just too much for a woman my age. She insisted I should not have to carry this kind of burden anymore. I saw Brenda and Jasmine exchanging knowing looks across my living room. They were working together. Brenda was using her so-called comfort to gaslight me, actively planting the seed that I was no longer fit to live independently. She validated every cruel narrative Jasmine was spinning. Brenda's gentle voice masked a wicked intention, proving that betrayal often comes wrapped in a warm hug and a fake smile. While my heart was bleeding for my dead husband, these two women were teaming up, smiling right in my face and quietly building a case to declare me incompetent so they could take everything James and I had built. The days following my husband's funeral blurred into a confusing fog, but it was not just the grief clouding my mind. It was a deliberate and calculated campaign to break my sanity. Jasmine and Brenda started treating my home like it was their personal playground, but their games were deeply psychological. I would leave my reading glasses on the kitchen island, exactly where I had placed them every morning for 20 years. An hour later, they would be gone. I would find them stuffed inside the refrigerator or at the bottom of the laundry basket. When I asked about it, Jasmine would put on this sickeningly sweet voice, tilt her head, and say she saw me put them there. She would look at Andre and whisper loud enough for me to hear that grief was really taking a toll on my mind. Brenda was even worse. She started coming over every single afternoon, claiming she was bringing me comfort. But her comfort felt like a slow poison. I had scheduled a crucial follow-up appointment with my cardiologist, something James always made sure I never missed. When I showed up at the clinic, the receptionist looked at me with pity and said my daughter-in-law had called to cancel it because I was supposedly having a bad mental health day. I stood in that lobby, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks in pure humiliation. When I confronted Jasmine back at the house, Brenda stepped in right away. She grabbed my hand with her cold, clammy fingers and said I must have told Jasmine to cancel it and just forgot. Brenda sighed heavily and said it was perfectly normal for a woman my age to lose her grip on reality after such a massive trauma. She patted my back and told Andre they needed to look into round-the-clock care for my own safety. For a few terrifying days, I actually believed them. I sat in my bedroom staring at the walls, crying because I thought my brilliant, sharp mind was betraying me. I thought the loss of my husband had truly broken my brain. I started writing everything down in a little notebook I hid under my mattress, just to prove to myself that I was not going crazy. I would write down exactly where I left my purse, my keys, and my medication. And sure enough, the items would move, but my notes proved I was right. I was not losing my mind. They were stealing it from me, piece by piece, trying to paint me as a helpless, confused old widow who needed to be locked away for her own good. I am a black woman who managed a public school district for 30 years. I handled budgets, teachers, and thousands of students. I knew my mind was sharp. The realization that my own flesh and blood was gaslighting me was a different kind of heartbreak. It was a betrayal so deep it completely dried up my tears. The turning point happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my favorite armchair in the living room, the one James bought me for our 30th anniversary. I had closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion of the past few weeks wash over me. Jasmine, Andre, and Brenda were gathered around my kitchen island, sipping the expensive wine I had saved for special occasions. They thought I was fast asleep. They thought the old woman was deaf to the world. But I was wide awake, and what I heard extinguished any remaining maternal softness in my heart. Jasmine was pacing the floor, her heels clicking aggressively against my hardwood. She told Andre they needed to move faster, that playing the long game was taking too much time. She said her credit cards were completely maxed out, and the luxury car they just bought was 2 months behind on payments. Brenda chimed in, swirling her wine glass, telling them they had the perfect setup. She said all they had to do was get me to sign the medical and financial power of attorney by the end of the week. Brenda laughed, a cold and breathless laugh, and said she knew a facility right outside the city limits that took state aid, a place where they would not ask too many questions. Then my heart stopped completely. I waited for my son. My Andre, the boy I had worked double shifts to put through law school to shut them down. I waited for him to defend his mother. Instead, I heard him sigh in agreement. He said the debt from his failed business ventures was suffocating them. He told Jasmine that once they had my signature, they could liquidate the estate, sell this house, and wipe out their $200,000 debt overnight. Andre actually said I would not even know the difference once I was medicated in the nursing home. Hearing my own son agree to throw me away like garbage was a pain I cannot adequately describe. It was a physical blow to my chest. He was willing to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my freedom, just to cover up his financial failures and fund his wife's vanity. I sat perfectly still in that armchair, controlling my breathing so they would not notice I was awake. The grief that had been drowning me for weeks instantly evaporated. It was replaced by a crystal clear and icy determination. I was not just some helpless old widow. I was a survivor. They thought they were the smartest people in the room, plotting the downfall of a grieving mother. But they had made one fatal mistake. They forgot who they were dealing with. I stayed in that chair until they finished their wine and went up to the guest room they had commandeered. As soon as the house was quiet, I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. It was time to go to war. The very next morning, while Jasmine and Andre were out running their errands and Brenda was at her own home, I walked into James's old home office. I locked the door behind me. James was a meticulous man, a man who always planned for every possible storm. He spent hours in this room organizing our lives. I began to search through his heavy mahogany desk, looking for anything that could help me protect myself. I checked every drawer and every file cabinet, but found nothing out of the ordinary. I sat in his leather chair, feeling a moment of despair. Then I remembered a conversation we had years ago. James always joked that the true foundation of a house was the books you keep. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling bookshelf that covered the entire back wall. I started pulling books off the middle shelf, the ones he read the most. As I cleared the space, I noticed that the wood paneling behind the books felt slightly loose. I pressed my hands against the polished oak and pushed. With a soft click, the panel popped open, revealing a hidden compartment built directly into the wall. Inside was a heavy and fireproof metal lockbox. My hands shook as I pulled it out and set it on the desk. I knew the combination immediately. It was the date we bought our first home together. I spun the dial and the box clicked open. Inside there were stacks of pristine financial ledgers, bank statements I had never seen before, and right at the very top, a thick, white envelope. Written on the front in my husband's strong and familiar handwriting were the words to Valerie, "If they turn on you." A fresh wave of tears stung my eyes, but these were tears of profound gratitude. James had always been my protector, even from the grave. I tore open the envelope and began reading the documents inside. James had secretly established an ironclad corporate trust years before he passed. He saw Jasmine's greed long before I wanted to admit it, and he saw Andre's weakness when it came to her demands. The documents proved that James had completely transferred the ownership of our house, our savings, and his life insurance policies into a secure trust. And the sole and uncontested controller of that trust was me. Furthermore, there was a secondary document, a legally binding real will that superseded the generic one he had given to Andre for safekeeping. This real bin contained strict stipulations about my care and our assets. It anticipated exactly what Jasmine and Andre were trying to do. James had set a brilliant and flawless trap to protect his wife. He made sure that if our son ever tried to forcefully displace me or seize my assets, he would lose absolutely everything. I sat in my husband's chair, holding the papers to my chest. They thought I was an easy target. They thought they had cornered me. But James had given me the ultimate shield. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when they made their final move. Andre and Jasmine walked into my kitchen, carrying a thick manila folder. Andre placed it on the granite counter with a heavy sigh, trying to put on his best performance of a concerned son. He told me it was just standard probate paperwork, simple legal formalities to handle his father's remaining hospital bills and tie up loose ends. He handed me a fancy silver pen and pointed to a stack of dotted lines. He said the lawyers needed my signature right away, so the estate would not be tied up in probate court for months. I looked down at the papers. I did not need to be a lawyer to recognize exactly what they were. These were documents granting complete financial and medical power of attorney. They were trying to strip me of my rights with a single stroke of a pen. I placed the pen down on the counter and looked my son straight in the eyes. I told him I was not signing anything without having my own legal counsel review it first. Andre flinched, looking over at his wife for backup. That is when Jasmine completely dropped her act. The fake sweet daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by a cold and calculating woman. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a glossy brochure. She slammed it down, right on top of the legal papers. It was a pamphlet for a rundown state-funded nursing home on the outskirts of the city, a place notorious for absolute neglect. Jasmine crossed her arms and leaned in close to my face. She said they were trying to do this the easy way, but if I wanted to make it hard, they were perfectly prepared for that. She told me I was clearly suffering from severe cognitive decline since my husband died. She smirked and said she and Brenda had been keeping a detailed log of my memory lapses, my confusion, and my inability to care for myself. Then she delivered her ultimate threat. She said I had two choices. I could sign the paperwork right now and go to the facility quietly, or they would drag me into court, have a judge declare me legally incompetent, and force me out of the house. Andre stood right there, staring at the kitchen floor, letting his wife threaten the woman who gave him life. He muttered that it was for my own good, that the house was too much for me to handle anyway. My heart pounded against my ribs, but it was not out of fear. It was pure, unadulterated fury. They had orchestrated my demise in my own home, assuming I was nothing more than a fragile, grieving widow who would crumble under their pressure. They expected tears, they expected begging, they expected me to break. But I had James's secret weapon safely hidden away, and I was about to play my hand perfectly. I knew that if I fought back right then, they would escalate their attacks. I needed time to execute the plan James had left for me. So I took a deep breath, let my shoulders slump, and looked down at my hands. I forced my voice to tremble just enough to sound completely defeated. I told them I just needed a few days. I asked them to please give me until the end of the week to pack up my precious memories and say goodbye to the home I had built with my husband. Jasmine smiled a wicked, triumphant smile. She patted my shoulder with her icy hand and told me that was a very smart choice. She said I had until Sunday to pack my essentials. As soon as they drove away in their least luxury SUV, my tears of defeat dried up instantly. I grabbed my purse, carefully tucked James's locked metal box inside a heavy canvas tote bag, and drove straight into the city. I went directly to the law offices of Mr. Harrison. He was an elite estate lawyer and James's oldest, most trusted friend. When I walked into his immaculate office and placed the metal box on his heavy mahogany desk, his eyes widened in surprise. I handed him the key I had found taped to the bottom of the box. He opened it and carefully pulled out the sealed envelope containing the real will and the trust documents. We sat together for hours reviewing every single page. Mr. Harrison explained exactly what James had done to protect me. The house we lived in, the savings accounts, and the massive investment portfolios did not legally belong to James anymore. Years ago, my brilliant husband had quietly transferred every single asset into an irrevocable corporate trust, and the sole uncontested beneficiary and controller of that trust was me. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair and smiled a warm, reassuring smile. He told me that Jasmine and Andre could forge all the competency logs they wanted, but they could not touch a single dime. The generic will they thought gave them everything was completely null and void. The trap James had set was absolutely flawless. Furthermore, the documents revealed that my husband's holding company had actually co-signed the massive business loans Andre had taken out a few years prior. The very same loans that were currently drowning him and Jasmine in suffocating debt. By attempting to force me out of my home, Andre had triggered a specific penalty clause hidden deep in the real will. Mr. Harrison looked at me with deep respect. He said my husband made sure that if they ever turned on me, I would have the absolute power to ruin them financially. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over my spirit. I told Mr. Harrison to prepare the final paperwork. It was time to give my greedy daughter-in-law exactly what she deserved. For the next 3 days, I played my part perfectly. I walked around my house in my old slippers, quietly packing a few small boxes to make it look like I was preparing for the nursing home. Jasmine and Brenda were practically giddy with excitement. They started coming over every single afternoon, boldly walking through my rooms and discussing their grand remodeling plans. Brenda pointed to my beloved rosewood dining table and told Jasmine it had to go straight to the dump. Jasmine agreed, saying she was going to tear down the kitchen walls to create a modern, open-concept space for hosting lavish dinner parties. They talked about hiring contractors and picking out expensive marble countertops, acting as if I were completely invisible. I just smiled to myself, sipping my herbal tea, letting them build their castles in the sky. I knew the higher they climbed, the harder their inevitable fall would be. While they were busy measuring for chandeliers and picking out paint swatches, I was busy executing my own quiet preparations. Over the years, Andre and Jasmine had stored a massive amount of their personal belongings in my spacious basement and attic. They treated my home like their free personal storage facility, leaving behind boxes of old designer clothes, unused furniture, and endless clutter they did not have room for in their rented townhouse. When they were not looking, I went down to the basement with a stack of heavy-duty black trash bags. I systematically packed every single item that belonged to them. I stuffed Jasmine's old pageant gowns, Andre's college trophies, and their discarded home decor into those thick plastic bags. I dragged them all to the garage, lining them up perfectly by the side door. I wanted everything ready for their imminent departure. Then I made a very important phone call. I contacted Andre and told him that since Sunday was my last day in the house, I wanted to have a small family gathering. I told him I had spoken to Mr. Harrison and that the lawyer would be coming over to officially read James's will and finalize the estate transfer. Andre sounded absolutely thrilled. He quickly agreed, telling me he would make sure Jasmine and his Aunt Brenda were there for the legal formalities. He thought he was coming to collect his grand prize. He thought he was going to walk away with a $500,000 property and a comfortable fortune. He had no idea that I had coordinated the exact timing with Mr. Harrison. The stage was perfectly set. The trash bags were waiting in the garage. The real will was safely hidden in the lawyer's briefcase. I spent Saturday evening walking through my beautiful, quiet home, feeling the loving presence of my late husband in every single room. I went to bed that night feeling no sorrow, no fear, and absolutely no hesitation. I was a mother who had given everything, and now I was a woman ready to take everything back. Sunday afternoon arrived with a deceptive calm. I had arranged the living room just as I had for decades of family gatherings, but today the air was thick with a different kind of anticipation. Mr. Harrison sat at the center of my dining table, his heavy leather briefcase resting beside him. Jasmine paraded into my house wearing a bright floral dress, treating the occasion like a victory lap. She actually brought a bottle of expensive champagne, popping the cork in my kitchen and pouring glasses for herself and Andre before even offering a formal greeting. Brenda trailed right behind them, her eyes darting around the room as she whispered loudly to Jasmine about how much the antique vases and the Persian rugs would fetch at an estate sale. They took their seats on the sofa across from me. Jasmine crossed her legs and took a long sip of her champagne, sending me a smug and triumphant smirk over the rim of her glass. She looked at me not as a grieving widow, but as an obstacle she had finally cleared from her path. Andre sat beside her, refusing to meet my gaze. His hands clasped nervously in his lap. He looked pathetic, completely stripped of the strong values his father and I had instilled in him. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses. He pulled out the standard will, the one they all knew about, and began reading the familiar legal jargon. He read the clauses outlining the distribution of minor personal items and the initial intent to leave the bulk of the estate to our only son, Andre. As the words filled the room, Jasmine practically bounced in her seat. She could not even wait for Mr. Harrison to finish the page. She interrupted him mid-sentence, setting her champagne glass down with a sharp clink. She demanded that I hand over the primary set of house keys immediately. She stated that since the house was now officially going to Andre, they needed to bring the contractors in first thing Monday morning, and my presence would simply be in the way. She told me the transport van for the low-income care facility was already booked for tomorrow at noon, so I needed to wrap up my emotional goodbyes today. I sat perfectly still, my posture straight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at her, waiting for the trap to spring. Mr. Harrison slowly lowered the standard document and peered over his glasses at Jasmine. The room went completely silent as he reached into his briefcase and pulled out the thick white envelope. It was the sealed envelope I had found hidden in James's office, the one boldly labelled to Valerie if they turn on you. Mr. Harrison calmly stated that the document he had been reading was simply an older revoked draft. He broke the heavy wax seal of the envelope, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet living room. He announced that he was now opening the final, legally binding testament and trust directive of James Arthur. Jasmine's smirk instantly vanished. She leaned forward, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the armrest of the sofa. Andre finally looked up, his face draining of all colour. Mr. Harrison began to read the true directives. He detailed the creation of the irrevocable corporate trust, confirming that every single asset, including the very house we were sitting in, was entirely controlled by me. Then he read the specific poison pill clause James had so brilliantly crafted. His strong, unwavering voice declared that if Andre or his spouse ever attempted to displace me from my home or sought to declare me legally or medically incompetent against my will, Andre's entire inheritance would be immediately and permanently revoked. A gasp escaped Brenda's lips, her hands flying to cover her mouth. But Mr. Harrison was not finished. He turned directly to my son and read the final devastating stipulation. The massive business loans Andre had taken out to fund his failed ventures had been co-signed by James's holding company. The will explicitly mandated that upon any breach of the inheritance clause, the holding company was to immediately withdraw its backing and call the loans due in full. Because Andre had actively participated in the plot to evict me and seize my assets, the trust was legally required to demand immediate repayment. Mr. Harrison lowered the paper and looked my son dead in the eyes. He informed Andre that the trust was calling in the entire $200,000 debt payable within 30 days, or they would face immediate legal action and forced bankruptcy. The silence in the room was absolute. The trap had snapped shut, with bone-crushing precision. The devastating reality hit Jasmine like a physical blow. The colour completely washed out of her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. She dropped her champagne glass onto the hardwood floor, the delicate crystal shattering into dozens of sharp pieces. Not only were they getting absolutely nothing from the estate, but they were now buried under a mountain of debt that they had zero means to repay. Andre buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic groan of pure despair. I stood up from my armchair. My posture radiated the strength and dignity of a black woman who had survived far worse storms than the pathetic greed of an entitled daughter-in-law. I walked over to the hallway and dragged out the heavy black trash bags I had packed the night before. I dropped them right at Jasmine's designer heels. I looked down at her and told her those bags contained every single piece of junk they had been storing in my home. I told her that she was no longer welcome on my property, and that if she ever stepped foot on my driveway again, I would have her arrested for trespassing. Jasmine broke down into a humiliating, hysterical panic. She fell to her knees, grabbing the hem of my skirt, crying and begging me to reconsider. She sobbed that they would lose their cars, that they would be ruined, that they were family and needed my help. But her crocodile tears meant absolutely nothing to me. I looked at Andre, the son who had been willing to throw me away, and told him that his father would be deeply ashamed of the man he had become. I remained completely immovable, a fortress of boundaries they could no longer cross. I turned my attention to Brenda, who was trying to quietly sneak toward the front door. I called out her name, making her freeze in her tracks. I told her she was a treacherous snake who had abused her place in this family for the last time. I ordered all three of them out of my house immediately. They scrambled for the door, hauling their trash bags over their shoulders, completely stripped of their arrogance and their pride. I stood on my front porch, watching them drive away in the luxury car they would soon lose. The air in my home was finally clean. Justice had been served. 6 months have passed since that rainy afternoon when I took my life back. Today, I am sitting on the balcony of a beautiful villa in Tuscany, sipping my tea and watching the sunrise. I am thriving in ways I never thought possible. Instead of wasting away in some forgotten facility, I am traveling the world, exploring the places James and I always dreamed of seeing. I manage my substantial estate with a clear mind and a full heart, completely secure in the knowledge that my future is entirely my own. I recently heard through a mutual acquaintance that Jasmine and Andre had to surrender their luxury cars and move into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment just to make the minimum payments on their massive debt. Their greed cost them everything. As for me, I have finally found true peace. I rely on the inner strength that got me through my darkest days, and I am forever grateful for the profound, final protection my late husband secured for me. James knew my worth, even when my own flesh and blood forgot it, and I intend to honor his memory by living every single beautiful day to the absolute fullest. To all the women out there, especially the older women who gave their lives to their families, please hear me. Never let anyone convince you your golden years are a burden. Protect your peace, fiercely secure your assets, and always know your undeniable worth. You deserve respect, dignity, and a life on your own terms. If you enjoyed my story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it there. I love reading your responses. Until next time, stay strong and guard your golden years.